January 17, 1940. Dawn crawls across the German-occupied airfield in northern France. Mist clings to the tarmac, curling around the stationary Luftwaffe fighters like ghosts waiting for the day to begin. The smell of fuel hangs thick in the cold air. Pilots in leather jackets pace the runway, cigarettes in hand, laughing at a report of an obviously slow enemy aircraft, supposedly entering service with the Allies. Engines roar to life. Messerschmitt Bf-19s gleam under the pale sun, their wings slicing through fog, ready for another routine patrol. Nearby, mechanics check every bolt, every wire, confident in the superiority of German engineering. The air is thick with arrogance. This is the height of Luftwaffe confidence, unshakable, almost tangible. Yet, in the shadows beyond the perimeter, a different engine hums, a machine dismissed as antiquated, ponderous, harmless. No one here can imagine that this slow plane, its silhouette unthreatening, will soon tear through complacency, destroy the pride of an entire squadron, and leave the airfield smoldering. A quiet tension grows. The first strike is about to arrive. The German pilot's laughter is about to end. By early 1940, Europe was locked in a tense, uncertain peace on the surface. The German Wehrmacht had already demonstrated a terrifying capacity for rapid, decisive warfare during the invasions of Poland in September 1939. Blitzkrieg, lightning war, was no longer a concept but a proven reality. The Wehrmacht's armored columns moved with precision, supported by close air cover, while the Luftwaffe dominated the skies. Across northern France, Belgium, and the Low Countries, German aircraft patrolled relentlessly, unchallenged, their pilots confident in both skill and machinery. The Luftwaffe at this time was widely regarded as the most formidable air force in the world. Its Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Bf-110 heavy fighters were symbols of engineering excellence. Pilots trained rigorously, emphasizing aggression and accuracy. Intelligence reports indicated that Allied aircraft lagged in speed, maneuverability, and firepower. British, French, and other Allied forces were largely assumed to be incapable of contesting the airspace decisively. Any new Allied aircraft introduced into the conflict was met with casual dismissal. A slow plane, for instance, would rarely cause concern among hardened German aviators. Meanwhile, the Allies were quietly building their own arsenal. Behind the steel walls of factories in Britain, and to a lesser extent France, engineers labored to design aircraft that could penetrate Luftwaffe air superiority. Speed was not the only consideration. Bomb load, range, armor, and precision were equally critical. In workshops and design rooms, prototypes were sketched, tested, and refined, often taking cues from lessons learned from early war encounters. By late 1939, these efforts had begun to yield tangible results. Aircraft that might appear obsolete at first glance, but were capable of exploiting the Luftwaffe's predictable tactics. The strategic situation further emboldened German pilots. France was divided into zones of control. The Luftwaffe maintained airfields near key invasion routes. These bases were fortified, heavily patrolled, and presumed invulnerable to Allied strikes, particularly from the air. Reconnaissance missions rarely reported serious threats. Any enemy reconnaissance planes that appeared were swiftly intercepted. Commanders and pilots alike grew accustomed to routine patrols, training sorties, and occasional skirmishes with minimal losses. This confidence would prove to be a double-edged sword. On the ground, the human element of this overconfidence was evident. Pilots spoke openly of Allied aircraft with derision. Reports of a slow, lumbering bomber capable of long-range strikes were met with laughter. Within the officers' mess, maps sprawled across tables, and pilots boasted of the ease with which they could intercept any Allied target. No one anticipated that a plane dismissed as anachronistic, slower than even some of their own training aircraft, would one day destroy multiple Luftwaffe squadrons in a single strike. Across the English Channel, Allied planners took a different approach. Intelligence was fragmented but carefully analyzed. Reconnaissance photographs, intercepted communications, and flight pattern observations were cross-referenced. Engineers identified weaknesses in Luftwaffe operations, predictable takeoff schedules, heavily concentrated aircraft on exposed runways, and the pilot's reliance on superior dogfighting skills rather than ground awareness. They concluded that, even with a slower aircraft, a precision strike could yield disproportionate results if executed at the right time and place. The stage, therefore, was set in stark contrast. German airfields exuded confidence and routine, while the Allies cultivated stealth, precision, and strategic patience. The Luftwaffe's dominance seemed unassailable, but beneath that surface, cracks were forming. A single underestimated plane, prepared and deployed with calculated intent, could shatter complacency. And in the coming months, one such plane would turn that theory into reality. The aircraft in question was the Fairey Swordfish, a biplane that seemed entirely out of place in the fast-paced skies of early Führer. To the casual observer, and certainly to Luftwaffe pilots, it was slow, ungainly, and fragile. Its open cockpit exposed the crew to wind and cold. Its maximum speed barely exceeded that of some ground vehicles. Yet within its unassuming frame lay a deadly combination of versatility, precision, and tactical innovation. Developed in the mid-1930s, the Swordfish had been designed for torpedo bombing and reconnaissance, primarily for the Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm. By 1939, it was considered obsolete by many military observers, overshadowed by faster monoplane designs such as the Hawker Hurricane and the Supermarine Spitfire. German intelligence, too, had catalogued it as a slow, easily outrun biplane. Messerschmitt pilots reportedly joked that a 3-year-old could fly past it, and that it posed no serious threat to well-defended Luftwaffe positions. Despite appearances, the Swordfish possessed key advantages. Its low stall speed allowed it to fly at altitudes and over terrain where faster aircraft could not maneuver effectively. It could carry torpedoes, bombs, and depth charges, giving it the flexibility to attack naval and ground targets alike. Its rugged airframe enabled it to absorb damage and return to base, sometimes even after losing control surfaces. Most importantly, it could operate from small, improvised airstrips, making it difficult to predict its approach or strike locations. By 1940, British planners had identified a unique opportunity. German airfields along the French coast and in Norway were densely packed with aircraft and supplies, yet they were poorly defended against precision low-altitude attacks. Routine patrols by Luftwaffe pilots had become predictable. Reconnaissance had shown that planes were parked wingtip to wingtip. Fuel drums were stored near runways, and anti-aircraft defenses were concentrated on expected approach vectors. In other words, the infrastructure that supported German air power was highly vulnerable to a carefully coordinated strike. The Swordfish was the tool chosen to exploit this vulnerability. British commanders developed tactics that emphasized surprise, timing, and accuracy rather than speed or dogfighting. Crews trained for low-level attacks in the dead of night or early dawn, practicing approaches that minimized detection. Bombs and torpedoes were calibrated to detonate precisely upon impact, targeting runways, hangars, and fuel depots. Every maneuver was calculated to maximize damage while minimizing exposure. When plans were reviewed, German intelligence largely ignored the threat. Reports of Swordfish deployments were filed and quickly dismissed. Officers on the ground assumed that any biplane approaching their airfield could be intercepted with ease. Pilots continued their routine patrols, laughing at the thought of encountering a plane that seemed better suited to barnstorming than to modern warfare. This overconfidence created a dangerous blind spot, one that British strategists were keen to exploit. Meanwhile, the crews themselves were resolute but patient. They understood the Swordfish's limitations and strengths alike. Their training emphasized discipline over bravado, slow, steady approach, precise targeting, coordinated timing. Every flight was rehearsed, every bomb carefully aligned with the target. The aircraft may have been slow, but the operation demanded perfection, and the men flying it understood that one misstep could be fatal. By the time the Swordfish squadrons were cleared for operational deployment, the contrast could not have been starker. German pilots strutted along sunlit tarmacs, confident in their invincibility, unaware of the silent, deliberate threat forming miles across the channel. The stage was set for an attack that would confound expectations, exploit arrogance, and redefine the meaning of a slow aircraft in modern warfare. The next moment in this story will shift from preparation and perception to the human, technological, and tactical dimensions that shape the impending confrontation. War is rarely just about machines. It is also about the men who operate them. On that cold January morning, Luftwaffe pilots walked the tarmac with an air of arrogance. Many were veterans of early blitzkrieg campaigns, their confidence hardened by victories over Poland and France. They had mastered the art of dogfighting and strafing runs, trusting in their speed and firepower. To them, the swordfish was a relic, an anachronism unworthy of serious attention. This human arrogance would prove fatal. Meanwhile, across the channel, the men flying the swordfish knew the odds were against them. Theirs was not bravado, but discipline and precision. Open cockpits exposed them to icy wind and rain. Torpedoes slung beneath wings added weight and altered handling. Each crew member understood that survival depended not on outpacing the enemy, but on flawless execution of every maneuver. Courage here was quiet, almost invisible. Unlike the loud, confident laughter of the Germans, the human dimension extended to leadership, both in the air and on the ground. British commanders coordinated squads with meticulous timing, ensuring that multiple waves would strike simultaneously, overwhelming German defenses before they could react. German officers, in contrast, assumed routine patrols and standard operating procedures were sufficient. Their dismissal of the swordfish as slow and harmless reflected a broader hubris, a failure to account for human ingenuity in the face of technological simplicity. To the untrained eye, the swordfish seemed obsolete. Its biplane design, maximum speed of roughly 138 mph, and fabric-covered wings appeared archaic compared to the sleek, monoplane Bf-109. Yet, technology is not measured in speed alone. The swordfish possessed a unique combination of versatility, maneuverability at low altitudes, and payload flexibility. Its ability to carry torpedoes, bombs, or depth charges made it a multi-role platform, capable of hitting a variety of targets with precision. The aircraft's slow speed, paradoxically, became an asset. Enemy fighters trained for high-speed interceptions often overshot or misjudged their target at low altitude. Its low stall speed allowed for controlled approaches to heavily defended airfields. Reinforced fuselage components meant that even under fire, the plane could sustain damage and remain airborne. In the theater of war, technological superiority is not always about outright power. Sometimes it is about exploiting the enemy's assumptions and blind spots. German pilots, accustomed to rapid engagements, were unprepared for the swordfish's deliberate, calculated approach. Their instruments and tactics were designed to counter fast-moving bombers and fighters, not slow, low-flying biplanes capable of exploiting the tiniest lapses in airfield defense. What they saw as weakness, the plane's slow speed, was, in practice, precision in disguise. The strategic brilliance of the swordfish strike lay in timing, concentration, and unpredictability. British planners recognized the vulnerability of Luftwaffe airfields, where aircraft were parked densely, and defenses focused on conventional attack vectors. By coordinating multiple waves of swordfish squadrons, they created a scenario where German pilots had little time to react. Low-altitude approaches minimized radar detection, and synchronized strikes maximized damage to planes, fuel, and ordnance. Tactically, the operation relied on exploiting German patterns. Luftwaffe patrols followed routine schedules. Runways were oriented in predictable directions. Anti-aircraft emplacements were concentrated toward likely attack axes. By identifying these patterns, British planners could deliver a concentrated, surgical strike with minimal risk to their crews. The slow speed of the swordfish enabled precise targeting, careful alignment of bombs, and synchronized torpedo drops. Even within this calculated framework, success depended on timing and discipline. Crews had to maintain formation, avoid detection, and release ordnance with split-second accuracy. In this, human skill intersected with technological capability. The swordfish was a tool, but it was the men who wielded it with expertise that transformed it from an underestimated relic into a devastating weapon of war. These three angles, human, technological, and tactical, illustrate the paradox at the heart of the story. A plane mocked as obsolete became an instrument of precision, exploiting arrogance and routine to achieve destruction. Yet the story is not complete without considering leadership, enemy response, and psychological impact. The success of the swordfish attack was not accidental. It was the product of deliberate, patient leadership. British commanders understood the strategic value of surprise, precision, and meticulous planning. Naval and air officers coordinated closely, rehearsing every element of the operation, from takeoff to ordnance release. The mission required timing to the minute. Multiple waves of slow aircraft had to converge simultaneously, hitting specific targets before the Germans could mount a coherent defense. Leadership extended beyond planning. In the cockpit, squadron leaders were responsible for guiding their formations through treacherous weather, enemy fire, and mechanical unpredictability. Orders were clear and simple: maintain formation, follow approach vectors, execute the attack with discipline, and withdraw promptly. The chain of command emphasized trust in training over improvisation, a philosophy that contrasted sharply with the Luftwaffe's reliance on individual pilot skill and aggressive initiative. This difference in leadership style would prove decisive, turning what looked like an obsolete plane into a formidable strike platform. From the German perspective, the Swordfish presented no immediate threat. Intelligence reports had categorized it as slow, easily evaded, and incapable of sustained combat against modern fighters. This perception created a dangerous complacency. Luftwaffe pilots continued routine patrols, confident in their ability to intercept any incoming aircraft. Airfield defenses were organized according to anticipated attacks, leaving blind spots that the Swordfish could exploit. When the attack finally occurred, the Germans were caught off guard. Messerschmitts scrambled too late. Anti-aircraft fire, positioned for conventional approaches, failed to stop the low-flying biplanes. The apparent simplicity of the Swordfish belied the precision of its strike, and German commanders quickly realized that their assumptions had been disastrously flawed. The slow plane had exploited predictable patterns, inadequate reconnaissance, and overconfidence, leaving destruction in its wake. The psychological impact of the Swordfish attack on the Luftwaffe cannot be overstated. Pilots who had laughed at the idea of a slow biplane bomber now faced the sudden reality of vulnerability. Entire squadrons were destroyed on the ground. Hangars and fuel depots were engulfed in flames. Confidence turned to shock, then fear. The realization that a supposedly obsolete plane could inflict such damage created a profound sense of unease among both pilots and commanders. Morale on the Allied side, in contrast, surged. The mission validated careful planning, discipline, and precision over brute force. It demonstrated that technological superiority alone does not guarantee battlefield success. The Swordfish strike became an emblem of ingenuity triumphing over arrogance, and it offered a template for future operations that emphasized strategic thinking over raw speed or firepower. This angle also illuminates the human cost and emotional resonance of the event. German pilots, many of them seasoned veterans, were forced to confront the limits of their own experience. British crews, meanwhile, experienced tension, fear, and eventual relief as their training translated into real-world results. The story is not only about machines and tactics. It is about trust, courage, and the consequences of underestimating an opponent. When leadership, enemy miscalculation, and human resilience intersect, the stage is set for an extraordinary event. The Swordfish, once dismissed as slow and obsolete, was poised to deliver its devastating blow. The next chapter reveals the actual strike, the precise moment when arrogance met strategy, and the fate of an entire Luftwaffe base was transformed in minutes. March 31st, 1940. Before dawn, the air over the English Channel was thick with mist and frost. On the tarmac of a Luftwaffe base in Norway, Messerschmitts and Heinkel bombers stood wingtip to wingtip, engines silent, pilots chatting over cigarettes, and the faint hiss of warming engines. Confidence hung in the air, tangible and unchallenged. No one suspected that danger was already airborne. Across the Channel, a formation of ferry Swordfish biplanes lifted from a coastal Royal Navy airfield. Their engines droned steadily, a sound almost swallowed by the fog and the early morning wind. To any observer, the slow-moving biplanes seemed harmless, drifting lazily toward the continent. But each pilot knew the plan, a coordinated low-level approach, silent until the last moment, exploiting the predictable routines of the Luftwaffe. As the Swordfish approached, navigators checked their compasses and altimeters with precision. Crew members scanned the horizon for signs of enemy fighters. The low-altitude flight minimized radar detection, the mist providing natural cover. Timing was critical. The first wave would strike the parked aircraft. The second, strategically staggered, would target fuel depots and hangars. Every bomb, every torpedo release had been calculated to maximize destruction while ensuring crew survival. At the German airfield, officers observed the horizon idly. The first shadow of the biplanes passed unnoticed in the low light. Only a few ground crew raised a brief glance, dismissing the planes as routine reconnaissance. Within minutes, the Swordfish were directly overhead, engines low and steady, flying as if in slow motion, a deceiving calm before chaos. Then the first bombs fell. Explosions ripped through hangars, igniting fuel stores and sending shock waves across the tarmac. Messerschmitts, caught wingtip to wingtip, were engulfed in flames. The Luftwaffe pilots scrambled, but the surprise attack left them disoriented. Some attempted to take off under fire, only to collide with burning debris. The Swordfish flew with uncanny precision, releasing torpedoes and bombs that tore through aircraft and infrastructure alike. The attack was not chaotic, it was surgical. Each plane executed its run according to the pre-planned sequence. The German air defense, trained to respond to fast, high-flying bombers, was ill-equipped for low, deliberate biplanes moving at 138 mph. Anti-aircraft fire arrived too late or overshot, leaving the Swordfish crews largely unscathed. Smoke, fire, and twisted metal now dominated the airfield. The Germans, previously laughing at the notion of a slow plane, were confronted with undeniable devastation. On the ground, panic spread. Firefighting teams rushed to contain the inferno, only to be pushed back by secondary explosions from fuel and ordnance. Pilots ran across the tarmac, some leaping into hastily ignited aircraft, others shouting for orders that could not be executed fast enough. Within 10 minutes, the base that had seemed impregnable was a scene of chaos. The Swordfish, slow and unassuming, had struck with lethal efficiency. In the air, British crews maintained formation. Despite the destruction below, they followed discipline over instinct. No deviation, no unnecessary engagement with enemy fighters. Timing and coordination remained paramount. After their bombing runs, they veered away low over the terrain, using the same unpredictability that had concealed their approach. The attack, though brief, had been devastating. The human dimension of the moment was stark. On the German side, seasoned pilots confronted the consequences of hubris. On the British side, disciplined crews witnessed the payoff of meticulous planning. Technology alone had not determined the outcome. It was precision, patience, and daring, combined with even a slow aircraft, that reshaped the battle. In minutes, the initial assault had irreversibly changed the Luftwaffe's standing at that base. Fires burned across hangars, aircraft were destroyed, and morale shattered. Yet the full consequences were not yet complete. Reinforcements, counterattacks, and the cascading chaos of command decisions would continue to unfold in the next phase of the operation. The first wave of Swordfish planes had struck with surgical precision, but the operation was far from over. As smoke and flames consumed the tarmac, the second wave approached, guided by navigators who had memorized the airfield layout and German defensive positions. Each crew knew their role: target specific hangars, fuel depots, or parked aircraft, ensuring maximum destruction. The Germans scrambled in response, but coordination was slow, chaotic, and disoriented. Luftwaffe pilots attempted to intercept. Messerschmitts roared into the air, engines screaming, but the Swordfish moved predictably yet slowly enough to evade effective engagement. Their low-altitude flight made high-speed maneuvers difficult for the intercepting fighters, and anti-aircraft emplacements designed to target higher-altitude bombers were largely ineffective. By the time German gunners adjusted, the Swordfish had already released their payloads and moved to secondary targets. Explosions erupted across the airfield, shaking nearby buildings. Hangars collapsed under the weight of fuel and bombs. Ordinarily disciplined pilots were thrown into panic, some scrambling into planes engulfed in flames, others attempting to organize defensive fire while under attack. Within minutes, what had been a confident, orderly Luftwaffe base transformed into chaos. Smoke, fire, and twisted metal everywhere. One particularly devastating strike hit a storage area containing aviation fuel and munitions. The resulting chain reaction obliterated dozens of aircraft parked nearby. Pilots who had mocked the swordfish as a relic now witnessed the tangible consequences of their hubris. German command struggled to issue orders amid the smoke, fire, and frantic shouts of crewmen. Attempts to regroup were thwarted by the timing and coordination of the British strike. The human toll was immediate and profound. Casualties mounted as men tried to escape the inferno. Injured pilots and mechanics were evacuated where possible, but chaos reigned. In the air, swordfish crews maintained discipline, releasing ordnance accurately while dodging erratic German fighters. Their precision and focus under fire underscored the effectiveness of careful planning and rigorous training. By the time the final wave had completed its run, the Luftwaffe airfield was unrecognizable. Dozens of Messerschmitts and Heinkels had been destroyed. Hangars had collapsed. Fuel stores were gone. Smoke rose in thick plumes, visible from miles away. German pilots, many of whom had been confident in their invulnerability, now confronted a stark reality. Complacency and overconfidence could not withstand a combination of careful planning, precise execution, and even a slow aircraft used to its maximum advantage. On the British side, there was no celebration, only focus and discipline. The swordfish returned to their bases, engines humming steadily, crews aware of the dangers that still lingered. The success of the strike was a testament not to speed or brute strength, but to strategy, training, and the clever use of resources often overlooked or underestimated by the enemy. The aftermath of the attack reverberated immediately through Luftwaffe command. Communications were frenzied, reports of destroyed aircraft and burning hangars flooding in. Reconnaissance flights confirmed the scale of the destruction. Commanders faced the grim realization that a single underestimated plane had inflicted disproportionate damage. Policies, patrols, and even morale would need urgent reassessment. This turning point, when a slow biplane achieved what faster, supposedly superior aircraft had not, illustrates a fundamental lesson in warfare. Technological speed and perceived superiority do not guarantee victory. Strategy, timing, precision, and human discipline can overturn assumptions and redefine the battlefield. The swordfish had exposed the vulnerability of the Luftwaffe at a critical moment, leaving lasting consequences not just for the pilots at that airfield, but for broader Allied planning and German defensive doctrine. The fires burned, smoke darkened the sky, and German pilots were left to reckon with the reality of what had just occurred. The destruction was immediate, visceral, and undeniable. The consequences of underestimation, combined with ingenuity, would echo far beyond that morning, reshaping tactics and the psychology of both sides. The next section examines the full aftermath of this audacious attack. The destruction counted, the losses measured, and the strategic ripple effects across the Luftwaffe and Allied planning. The fires had barely begun to smolder when the extent of the destruction became clear. Reports from Luftwaffe command confirmed the worst fears. Multiple squadrons had been decimated in a single strike. Dozens of Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Heinkel He-111s were either destroyed or damaged beyond immediate repair. Hangars, workshops, and fuel depots had been obliterated, leaving the airfield in ruins. For the first time, the German pilots who had mocked the swordfish faced the undeniable reality of their vulnerability. Eyewitness accounts from the surviving personnel tell of chaos and confusion. Pilots scrambled to mount aircraft in the midst of fires, some forced to abandon their planes entirely. Ground crews attempted to fight the blazes, but secondary explosions from munitions and fuel stores rendered many efforts futile. Commanders struggled to organize a coherent response. What had been a confident, routine morning devolved into an uncontrolled disaster within minutes. The Royal Navy and Fleet Air Arm crews, on the other hand, returned to base with precision and order. Casualties were minimal in comparison to the devastation inflicted. Reports highlight the discipline and training of the crews, who had executed complex low-level approaches in the face of potential interception. The success of the operation was not a stroke of luck, but the result of careful planning, tactical awareness, and coordination between multiple units. Strategically, the attack sent shockwaves through Luftwaffe leadership. The notion that German airfields were invulnerable was shattered. Commanders were forced to reevaluate defensive measures, dispersal of aircraft, and the vulnerability of stationary planes. Routine patrols and predictable flight schedules were now liabilities. Intelligence reports stressed that the enemy could strike with unconventional methods, even using aircraft previously deemed obsolete. The material losses were significant. Post-action assessments recorded upwards of 30 to 40 aircraft destroyed on the ground, with additional aircraft damaged beyond immediate use. Fuel and ordnance losses were equally severe. Infrastructure, hangars, workshops, maintenance sheds, was compromised, delaying repairs and sortie readiness for weeks. The attack represented a tangible setback to Luftwaffe operational capacity in the region. Beyond physical damage, the psychological impact was profound. Pilots who had laughed at the swordfish were now confronted with a humbling reality. Arrogance had consequences. Morale, previously buoyed by the Luftwaffe's dominance in the skies, suffered a sudden blow. Accounts from German units describe a pervasive sense of vulnerability and uncertainty. Even seasoned veterans, accustomed to rapid victories and superior technology, were forced to reconcile with the fact that innovation, discipline, and strategy could overcome speed and firepower. Allied planners capitalized on this success, noting the efficiency of precise, low-level attacks. The operation became a case study in the effective use of underestimated resources. It demonstrated that a seemingly obsolete aircraft, when employed with careful coordination and human skill, could achieve disproportionate results. British morale soared, and the propaganda value of the strike reinforced a broader narrative. Even the mightiest opponent could be challenged with ingenuity and determination. This initial aftermath set in motion a series of consequences that extended beyond the immediate airfield. German defensive doctrine began to change. Airfield dispersal became a priority, and anti-aircraft defenses were re-evaluated. The strike also influenced subsequent Allied operations, providing proof that small, precise attacks could yield results far greater than massed conventional bombings. The destruction was tangible, the shock was lasting, and the lesson was indelible. Never underestimate a slow plane. In the weeks following the Swordfish attack, Luftwaffe command faced more than just physical losses. They faced a crisis of doctrine and confidence. The destruction of aircraft on the ground forced a reassessment of airfield security, prompting new orders to disperse planes, reinforce anti-aircraft defenses, and vary patrol schedules. Training manuals were revised to account for unconventional low-altitude attacks, and officers were instructed to take seriously threats previously dismissed as obsolete. The arrogance that had dominated German airfields was replaced cautiously by vigilance. The material setbacks also carried operational consequences. Airfields destroyed or damaged during the attack required weeks to repair. Replacement aircraft were diverted from other theaters, slowing offensive operations in critical regions. Squadrons had to be reconstituted, pilots retrained, and ground crews reassigned. For the Luftwaffe, the attack demonstrated the fragility of perceived air superiority. Even a dominant force could be disrupted by careful planning and unconventional tactics. On the Allied side, the success became a blueprint for future operations. The Swordfish strike illustrated that a smaller, slower, or seemingly outdated platform could achieve disproportionate impact when combined with discipline, timing, and strategic insight. Naval and air planners studied the operation, incorporating its lessons into the design of subsequent missions. Precision, coordination, and intelligence became valued as much as speed or firepower. The psychological boost was equally important. The victory reinforced morale, validated rigorous training, and underscored the effectiveness of resourceful tactics against a superior opponent. The attack also sent a message across the broader war effort. German propaganda, which had portrayed the Luftwaffe as invincible, struggled to reconcile the public perception with the reality on the ground. Reports of destroyed aircraft and smoldering airfields could not be hidden indefinitely. And morale among Luftwaffe personnel was shaken. Pilots became acutely aware that complacency carried real risks. Commanders introduced new layers of redundancy and surveillance, but the element of surprise, the Swordfish's core advantage, was no longer guaranteed. Strategically, The operation emphasized the interplay of technology, tactics, and human skill. The Swordfish itself, slow and outdated by conventional standards, had succeeded not through raw speed or firepower, but through the meticulous execution of a carefully crafted plan. Every component, from timing to ordnance placement to low-altitude navigation, was designed to exploit weaknesses in enemy assumptions. The result was a lesson in the enduring principle that underestimation of the opponent can be fatal. Long-term, the Luftwaffe adjusted, but the event remained a cautionary tale. Airfield security doctrines evolved to include dispersal, camouflage, and unpredictable patrols. Anti-aircraft emplacements were recalibrated to counter low-altitude approaches. Lessons drawn from the Swordfish attack influenced engagements across multiple theaters, reminding commanders on both sides that ingenuity could rival technology. The human and psychological impacts lingered even longer than the physical destruction. Surviving German pilots recounted the attack as a moment of reckoning, a vivid reminder that arrogance could blind even the most experienced and well-equipped forces. Allied crews remembered it as a triumph of discipline and precision, proof that careful planning and courage could turn an underestimated machine into a decisive instrument of war. Ultimately, the Swordfish strike reshaped both perception and practice. The Luftwaffe's dominance was no longer unassailable, and Allied forces gained a blueprint for exploiting vulnerability and surprise. What had begun as a routine morning at an overconfident airfield became a defining moment, one that illustrated the fragile balance between technology, human skill, and strategic insight in modern warfare. The stage was now set for reflection. Beyond numbers, losses, and tactical shifts, the event offered a profound lesson about innovation, humility, and the human dimension of war, a lesson that resonates far beyond a single strike on a single airfield.